大家好，我是 James 王俊英，这个是 Talk with James 说说英语聊聊生活频道的第一个视频。将来我打算给大家提供学习英语的好方法，还有分享我对生活百态的种种看法。希望这些视频能够对大家网友有帮助。今天呢，我要讲讲本人对语言学习，特别对英语学习的核心原则之一。以下的内容是以英语为主。Let's get started. I want to begin by stating that my perspective and context are from North America, namely from Canada in the United States, especially Canada, because that's my home context. And also, most of my content will be targeted towards advanced English learners rather than beginners or intermediate learners. And I want to begin with a question for reflection. How does an Asian person improve his or her English beyond the advanced level? Maybe you're an international student from China or Taiwan, Hong Kong, who has come to Canada or the United States for studies. You have already learned English in your homeland and may have even taken some intensive English courses before or shortly after coming to North America. You have passed the basic English courses, all the requirements. But now you're in a Western society and everyone around you speak English. Your teachers, your academic advisors, your classmates, your neighbors, even the servers at a restaurant, the bus driver, and so on and so on. You live in the West, and even though you have all the fundamental knowledge of English, you feel a disconnect with the people and society here. And you know that a part of that disconnection relates to your English level. So then, how do you improve beyond your current level? Or maybe you're a professional from Asia who has come to North America on a work visa. You may be an engineer or a software developer or a business person, or you may be in finance or the banking industry. Regardless, you have come over here to work. And perhaps you have studied before in North America. You went back to Asia, and now you want to try to continue your career and your life in the West. But you also feel a disconnect. You find that for your job, you communicate well in English, but when it comes to small talk, chit-chatting with your coworkers about topics outside of work, about your personal life, their personal life, you're just not as comfortable and not as fluent. When it comes to casual conversations, you may have experienced someone telling a joke, and you only understand that joke a few minutes later after everyone has returned back to their desk for work, and you realize you missed that opportunity. Or you feel that disconnect with your children who are growing up in North America, and they're becoming more and more westernized. Their main language is becoming English rather than Mandarin. And so when you start speaking to your children in English, sometimes they don't understand you. Sometimes they even tease your English, maybe on your word choice or grammar or pronunciation or even accent. In either case, you feel a disconnect with the people. And maybe you are a professional still living in Asia whose job requires you to interact with American business partners. But the same challenges that I mentioned earlier applies to you. You're able to talk shop, talk about business with the Americans, but when it comes to small talk, you feel that there is an awkwardness. And overall, you don't have the rapport that you can have if that disconnect could be overcome. So what do? Do you take another English course? Maybe you've done that, but you still experience the same problem. Maybe you even took an 8-week course on quote unquote business English, and yet they never cover all the possible topics that your coworkers bring up because life and people are so complex. Everyone has different experiences. They may be interested in different things. They may be interested in sports that are of interest in North America, like hockey, for example. And you were never trained, you never studied to talk about those westernized topics, for example. Or sometimes, even if you took an English course for business English, every workplace is different. And every specific company is different, even in the same industry. And you're lacking some of the vocab or context and things like that. and you're finding a disconnect. And you feel that that disconnect is language related. And at the root of it, you lack full fluency. And my recommendation for your lifelong learning of English and Western culture is through what I call immersion learning. Immersion learning. So, what is immersion learning? Immersion learning has the word immersion or the verb to immerse in it. It's like being immersed in water when you're taking a bath or when you're swimming in a lake. It refers to learning English in a natural environment rather than in a classroom. For the two groups I mentioned earlier, either as an international student or a professional working in the West, your natural environment is where you live, the people you work with every day, you see every day. This means that you can learn English and learn about Western culture just by living here in North America and paying attention to the English that you hear. You notice how people are speaking. You pay attention to what you're reading, whether it's street signs or a newspaper or documents you read at work, and you pay attention to how you write, and then you make corrections along the way. You don't really need an extra course, and that's the beauty of it. It's free, generally speaking. You just live your life, and you be intentional about improving your English as you live. It sounds easy, right? So then, why do so many Asian people who have come to live in North America seem to stagnate in their English? Why do some people never improve beyond a certain level? I actually know of very many older Chinese people who have lived in Canada for 20 to 30 years, but their English level is still mediocre. And I think there are several reasons for this. And I would like to suggest that you reflect on some of these reasons, some of these factors to see if they apply to you. And so the first one has to do with outside of school or work, their social environment is primarily Mandarin speaking still. This is actually a choice that a person makes over time. It's very normal and natural that we tend to make friends with people that are similar to us in language and culture. So even if you have come here to North America, you may have found Mandarin speakers to be your friends and people that you spend time with. And the older people I was telling you about who spent 20 to 30 years in Canada, but still has a low level of English, is because even though they immigrated here, their natural environment outside of work is still Chinese, especially in, if you know anything about Greater Vancouver, which is where I live with my family, there's a lot of Chinese people, Taiwanese people, people from Hong Kong that have come here. And they have chosen to immerse themselves not in the natural environment, but in still a Chinese speaking environment. So in some ways, they never left that culture. I actually recall when I was doing an exchange program back when I was a high school student, and I had met a Chinese family that lived in Montreal. They immigrated to Montreal from Hong Kong. And the father, I really enjoyed a relationship with their family, but the father had worked in Montreal for about 10 to 15 years and could not speak French nor English. He operated fully, and it was a Chinese company that was based in Montreal. So he only spoke Cantonese. And I conversed with him in Cantonese, but he never improved at all, even though his wife was learning French, his wife was learning English, and their son was learning French and English. And so they took themselves out of the natural immersive environment. And so back to the water analogy, they, in a sense, stepped out of the bathtub, outside of the lake, if you will. They did not take advantage of the natural immersion environment. Here's another reason. They stopped learning and improving. All learning takes intentionality and focus. You have to make a mental choice to learn something new or improve on an existing skill. You need to use your mind. You need to self correct. You need to remind yourself, okay, I need to use that different word, or I pronounce that word a little bit incorrectly. And you got to do something different every time. That's how you improve. And this applies to all learning. And of course, it applies to learning English. So perhaps you have been in North America for years. And in the first few years, you were very motivated to improve your English. So you would regularly watch English YouTube videos, listening to English audio, watch movies, American movies, Hollywood movies. You would write down new vocabulary. You would look up meaning of words in the dictionary. You'd pay attention to exactly how native speakers would speak English. You try to imitate them. You did all of those things. But then, of course, life goes on. You got busy. Perhaps as you settled here, you got married, you had children, especially with children. I have one of my own. I have a daughter. Life gets really busy, and you just got tired, and you stopped trying to learn. You stopped being intentional. Immersion language learning requires an English speaking environment, yes, but it requires the second essential ingredient, which is remaining in that environment and choosing to keep learning. You have to choose to keep learning day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year. And so, to summarize, the opposite of these pitfalls of language learning, it means that you remain or you choose an English speaking social environment. It means making friends with English speakers, Canadians or Americans, wherever you immigrated to. Going for coffee and lunch with your English speaking coworkers or classmates. You talk with your neighbors. Grab a bubble tea with them. Grab a coffee. Join a club, a sports club, dancing, music, whatever your interest may be. Join a club. Maybe go to church, go to an English speaking church. Meet some new people. It also means that you keep on trying, keep intentionality in learning English and learning about Western culture. And this requires a mindset shift. The same mindset that you may have had when you first came to the United States or Canada. You keep learning new vocabulary. And by the way, I grew up in Canada, and I'm still looking up English words on dictionary.com, which it's a website I really appreciate, even for myself. And English is basically my mother tongue. So I really encourage you, keep trying. Go to dictionary.com or other websites, look up words, pay attention to how English speakers speak. And when you're making a grammatical mistake or pronunciation mistake, you make a note for yourself. You write it down, you remind yourself, you write a note on your phone or something, and then you try to correct yourself and you keep learning. Another thing to keep learning about is to pay attention to the values of Western people. In Chinese, we talk about three major views, 三观, and you should try to notice how Westerners view these three areas, these three views. So, 人生观, the life, the view on life, and what is the purpose of life within society. 价值观, what are their values, including what's important to them, and their morals and ethics. And also 世界观, the world and an existential perspective. What is the meaning in life, meaning of existence? It's a philosophical term, existentialism, or cosmology. What is their view of how the world came to be? And historically speaking, in the West, a big part of those views are rooted in Christianity, this religion. And so be intentional. There are two types of immersion learning. And so far, I've only been speaking about the natural immersion environment. This is the most ideal way to improve your English, and it's free. You don't have to pay for a class. And as the term states, it's natural. So it's just living your life and being intentional. But the second immersion learning environment for those that are still, let's say, living in China or Taiwan or Hong Kong or other places, is what I call an artificial immersion environment. An artificial immersion environment. And as an example of an artificial immersion environment, I would like to share a bit about my own experience in learning Mandarin. In another video, I plan to talk about specific online resources that I would recommend for creating your own artificial immersion environment. But for now, here's my experience as a person who is not ESL, but MSL, Mandarin as a second language. Actually, technically speaking, Mandarin is my fourth language. And although I took a few beginner Mandarin classes back in college, it was not until I was in my mid to late 20s that I seriously started studying Mandarin. And it was just over a year ago that I really intensified my Mandarin studies, and I created this artificial immersion environment for myself. And so here's what I did. The first thing is I started using a social media app called Clubhouse. And it is an app that is for audio conversations, and you can speak using audio. It's an audio app that you can speak with people all over the world. And I started meeting and making new Mandarin speaking internet friends through this app. I listen and chat with them almost every day, and I practice. And fun fact, even though this app is an American app, I have actually never been on any English speaking clubhouse room. I've only joined Mandarin speaking and sometimes occasionally Cantonese speaking rooms. Another thing I did was I began to engage and talk with Mandarin speakers in my city. I would take my family to Mandarin speaking restaurants and here in Vancouver, in Greater Vancouver in Canada, and I would only speak Mandarin to the servers and people in the restaurant. I would also speak with Mandarin speakers that I meet each week, especially those that come to my church and others that are neighbors in the area. Another thing I would do with my family is in the evening after dinner, we started watching Mandarin movies and shows. So more recently, we've been going on YouTube and watching this Mandarin show called Yi Jia Ren Zhi Ming. And since my wife doesn't speak Mandarin, I put on English subtitles. And then it is also a way for my daughter, who is about 3.5, to also learn Mandarin. She's actually in a half Mandarin daycare. So I'm trying to get us all to kind of learn a little bit of Mandarin. Another thing I would do is I would listen to Mandarin music throughout the day, and I would even sing some Chinese songs with guitar. You can see the guitar here on the left on Clubhouse on the same app I mentioned earlier. I find actually listening to music, and if singing is your thing, singing is a great way to learn a language. And finally, I began to read Mandarin books that I was interested in, from more academic, technical, I guess, a little bit more knowledge-based Mandarin books like Wang Xiaobo 的《沉默的大多数》，或者费孝通的《乡土中国》, or more casual books like 三毛的《撒哈拉岁月》, or more recently 金庸的《神雕侠侣》. And actually, I'm almost done 1,000 pages in 神雕侠侣 in Chinese, so I'm pretty proud of that. That I can make it so far and actually really enjoy the book. That's really the key. And I would write my thoughts about them in essay format. I would write my thoughts and reflect on what I've learned in my reading. And I have done this for over a year now, since November of 2021. And I'm happy to report that my Mandarin tutor said late last year that I have improved so much, almost to the level of a native speaker. I know I'm not sure if that's true because I still don't feel very natural in communicating in Mandarin, but it was an encouragement what she said. And it was an affirmation to my language learning philosophy of immersion language learning. What are the major characteristics of the immersion learning method? And I want to point out that it is very different than the traditional classroom method. And first, how I would recommend for you, if you were to take this approach, the immersion language learning approach, is to after, if you already have a good fundamental of English grammar and a decent amount of vocabulary. Those of you that immigrate to Canada, the United States, and you work or study in this environment, you already have that. That's the only way you can even survive here. So for all of you to continue primarily to study English in the immersion method, the natural environment. The same thing. If you are still in Asia, but your English is already at an advanced level in terms of grammar and vocabulary, use an immersion method. Uh, Take some of the things I've tried for learning Mandarin and apply it to your English learning. And another characteristic of immersion learning is on communication with people, whether it's verbally or reading and writing, but not on grammar. And so focusing less on grammar, you can still look up words, of course. You can still touch up on a little bit of grammar if you forget and things like that. But mostly it's on communication. It's more or less how you learn your mother tongue, learn Mandarin growing up. At some point, probably late in elementary school, there were less lessons in Chinese grammar, and you just assumed, you just use the language. You learn all your courses, you start functioning, basically, right? You live normal life. So I would recommend using that very natural method to improve on your English once you have reached the typical advanced level. And so, for example, for myself, back to my learning experience in Mandarin, when I go on Clubhouse, I don't go to any of the learning Mandarin as a second language rooms. The basic Mandarin ones, I don't go to those anymore. I just talk with people, talk with my friends in Mandarin. And we have a good time and we learn in a natural environment based on communication and not grammar. Same thing when I'm watching what I was telling you about, the Mandarin show with my family. I sometimes look up words, but I mostly just enjoy the show. Okay, the point is just I enjoy it. And another aspect that I would recommend in the immersion method is choose communication environments that you enjoy. So make friends with people you get along with, that you actually want to learn from, or read books that you enjoy. Now, if you don't like reading books, maybe reading is not the right way. Maybe it's watching YouTube videos, watching movies, watching Netflix shows in English. Um, Music, for example, is another one. Pick the type of music you like, English language music. Pick the genre you like, right? But don't force yourself to do something because everyone else is doing it. Pick things that motivate you. So, how should we see the function of then the traditional classroom or getting a private tutor? As I mentioned, I did hire a Mandarin tutor who was an amazing teacher. She helped me so much. She was extremely competent. She understood my learning goals. She knew that she could push me hard to get my Chinese to the next level. She gave me really hard readings and corrected a lot of my grammar and my essays and things like that. She recommended good books that, after talking with me and finding out my interests, she was the one that recommended some of the books I mentioned earlier on. She explained the nuances of Chinese language, and she would kind of help me in those things. So she would support me. She would supplement my language learning. It wasn't my primary learning was not in a classroom meeting. We actually did it a video classroom. It wasn't primarily in the video classroom. It was whenever I met with her, she would supplement my learning. My learning happened outside of the classroom, primarily in a communication method. And so, if you do have an English teacher or an English tutor, my recommendation is to see that tutor as a coach. Uh, it's like a 教练, okay? It's like a coach for sports. They guide you, they give you feedback on where your level is at. They give some corrections that you can work on outside of the classroom. But primarily speaking, they supplement your learning and they give you tips to correct outside of the classroom time. And they provide resources like books or other methods to improve your learning and to bump up your learning up to the next level. And so this is my proposed solution to the problem I posed at the very beginning. How do you improve past the advanced level? Whether you are an immigrant here in North America as a student or as a professional, or if you are still in Asia, but you have a high motivation to learn to speak, and to learn to read and write English, perhaps because you're working with English speakers, English speaking clients and business partners. What do? Well, immersion language learning, whether it's the natural environment for the former group or the artificial language immersion method that I proposed earlier. And so in the future, I'll be posting more videos on my English learning philosophy. But before I conclude, I just want to make a few announcements. And the first is, if you want notifications on more videos from this channel, please subscribe to my channel. Perhaps you may have questions or comments about the immersion language learning method. And so please leave your comments below. Or if you're interested in one-on-one tutoring, please refer to the details in the description below and you can contact me. Other than that, 我希望这些分享能对你们有帮助。学好英语真的不容易，所以大家要加油。I'll see you next time.